moving on to the last technical session for the day. We're going to be discussing nutritionist perspective on farming system for nutrition. May I invite the chair, Dr. Longwa, Dr. Anurag Kurpat, Professor Indra Chakravarti, Dr. Bamji, Dr. Lalita Bhattacharjee. May I request you all to take your seat, please. Dr. Longwa doesn't require an introduction to the audience here. Nevertheless, he is the director in charge of National Institute of Nutrition. His research interest is on food composition, indigenous food system, micronutrient deficiencies, non-communicable diseases, and biofortification. He and his group are responsible for the Indian food composition database maintained at the National Institute of Nutrition, Hyderabad. He is the co-chair of the International Union of Nutritional Science Task Force on Traditional, Indigenous and Ethnic Foods and a member of IUNS Task Force on Food Composition and Biodiversity. He is also the regional coordinator for SARC Foods. He has published over 60 peer-reviewed papers and authored 5 book chapters. His latest book is the Indian Food Composition Tables, released this year in January. Sir, I request you to take over. Thank you for chairing the session. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Rukmini. I will not take much time. We have seen the country economic growth at 7.5 GDP, which is extremely good, and that has been going on for the last 3-4 years now. So our economy is very buoyant. On the other side, the agriculture, the production is very good. We have enough food grains to last 2 years, even if there is a drought. But all this has not translated into the nutritional, the impact on nutrition has been very, very, very poor. We have seen that the reduction on child malnutrition has been the greatest during the Green Revolution. That was a time when the country was a hungry country. So when the food was solved, see, from at that time in 1975, the child undernutrition was something like 76%. It came down to about 51% by 1997. Then onwards, it has been a very slow, and it has been dragging. The last NFHS 3 and 4, if you compare, the reduction in understanding has been less than 10%. Now it is the understanding is at 38.6%, which is still very high, unacceptably high. Why this has happened? Because food system, we are not looking at the whole thing in an integrated manner. We're looking at very abstract thing. Agriculture was on its own, nutrition was working on its own, the food people were working on its own, so on and so forth, even though nutrition is complex, multifactorial in nature. Food system encompasses the food production, the processing, distribution, preparation, consumption, and its outcome on health and nutrition. So we must look at the food system in totality so that we can develop a sustainable food system. Unless, like in the earlier speakers have stressed, that 1/4 of the hungry people or malnourished people lives in India. Unless India takes strident step, like yesterday the minister was talking, India has taken very firm step in the matter of diabetes, and now we are going to become the diabetes capital of the world. Now, in the same footing, India must take a firm step to reduce child undernutrition. Unless India makes this progress, the Millennium Sustainable Development Goal that the United Nations and so many countries have put forth will never be able to be achieved. With that few words, I think I will call upon the first speaker, Dr. Anura Kurpat. He needs no introduction. He is a professor at the St. John's College and Research Institute. He is a physiologist by training. He's a member of the, he is a fellow of the IUNS, editor of the Asian Journal of Asia Pacific Journal of Food and Nutrition. And he is one of the leading nutritionists in the country, Dr. Anurag Kurpa.
Thank you. Thank you, and thank you all for staying back and listening to this. I'm just going to talk about three considerations that I think are probably the first in my mind. There are many others. The first is a story of failures which I think have occurred with all our efforts to feed people appropriately. There is an elephant in the room as far as that goes, and I'll talk about that. And of course, there are non-food issues. The second substantive consideration is nutrient insecurity. It is something that we all were so enthusiastic about many years ago, when we thought that food insecurity had to progress to nutrient insecurity. But I think inadvertently, I think what we have seen, and I see it with mixed feelings, some of it is dismaying, that the discourse has changed away from foods to techno fixes of fortifying foods with chemicals. And that is, I don't say it's not required, but it does move the discourse away. It does move resources away from finding solutions when you think you can make an intrinsically bad food into a good food by putting a few chemicals into them. They also mean that people begin to think about single nutrient solutions. I'm not too happy about that, which is why I come here with a great deal of hope in that we're all talking about diversity, colors, and other things in the food, and that's a wonderful thing. But eventually, that needs to be translated. And the translation is difficult because all of us here think about nutrients in terms of the requirements of a person in a day. If you go through the nutrient requirements across the world, in every country, nutrient requirements are stated per day. When I hear you talk, and those of you who are agriculturists, you will talk about nutrients and food production per season or per year. And that makes translation really difficult for me, because, you know, I can say you should eat so much quantity per day, but I know that it's impossible to have the same diversity all through the year. The seasons, the production differs, and then you need to think about solutions for that problem as well. So we need to talk in the same language. And finally, I think the big problem of production, producers, and the consumers, and I'm going to demonstrate all this very quickly. The story of failures is quite clear. In India, we are finding we can't get anemia sorted out. We still have a lot of stunting. It is reducing, but at a elephantine pace of about 1% per year. Everything we try and do to increase that pace is just not working, and has to be seen with some amount of caution, because countries that did sort out undernutrition in children found that the pendulums shifted from undernutrition to obesity. So we don't want that happening. So we need to balance our ambition to get a 4% reduction if we can, versus the existing 1%. The second, and this has happened around the world, by the way, and the question we have to ask is, when we are looking at teaching people to eat or feeding them, are we feeding the right food? Is there poor density? Are they eating what we give them, or are they listening to us? And finally, whatever goes into their mouth, is it being absorbed? I think in the last session that was alluded to, and that is, don't think that you've done the job by putting food into a person's mouth. The question you have to ask is, was that food utilized? And just to illustrate this, I'll tell you the complex story of iron. Just very briefly, if you go through, you require about 1 milligram of iron per day, and to get that milligram inside, you need to eat quite a lot of iron. And typically, if you only absorb 5%, you need to eat about 20 milligrams of iron. And the problem is, we only absorb 3%. Now, I have actually measured this. You may say ragi is a wonderful millet that contains a lot of iron. Not true, not true, not true. it doesn't contain that much iron and it's not absorbed because it's only about 3%, particularly because it's also eaten with greens. Now, if you think about it, our diets are very inhibitory. And what we need really when we think about getting iron into our bodies is not about the density of iron, which is low, I agree, but it's really about absorbing that iron well. Because if we could absorb iron to 7.5 to 10% of what was in the diet, you wouldn't have anemia. You wouldn't have iron deficiency anemia. And this is the thing, that you need a molar ratio that is 2 molecules of vitamin C to 1 molecule of iron at least. What's really nice is if you can get it to 4:1. And if you look at the requirements that India has put up through the NIN, it says you need 40 milligrams per day, and that would give you a molar ratio of only 0.6 molecules of vitamin C to 1 molecule of iron. The reason is that our requirements are based on the need to prevent scurvy, but it is not based on the need to increase the absorption of iron in a population that eats such inhibitory foods. Now, the NIN book actually does a fantastic job of discussing all this. You must read the chapter on vitamin C. They've discussed it in a beautiful way, and they've come as far as saying that you need 20 milligrams of vitamin C with every meal. That's 60 milligrams with 3 meals. But then they kind of step back for some reason. And I don't know who the author of that was, but I think that needs to be revisited, and we need to really think, how much vitamin C do you need if you want to increase the absorption in the peculiar diet that we're eating in this country. And this is what I want to show you. That is a map of anemia in this country. As you will see, the northern Gangetic Plains, the central highlands there, the desert, the Indus Basin, all that towards the north, it's a lot of anemia over there, the red. Now, if I were to actually show you how much iron is eaten in those places, you will see that the iron eaten is quite a lot. I mean, if you look at the intake in milligrams, on average in this country is between 15 and 20 milligrams, and in places in the desert and other places, it's higher. Should you be fortifying foods? Yes, you could if you like, but the point I will make to you is, look at the other villain in the piece, and that is the amount of phytate in the country. And that's the amount of phytate, it's in gram quantities, obviously. And again, in the northern belts, it's high. In fact, it's in the southern and eastern parts of the peninsula that you actually see that there's a lesser amount of phytate. So if I were to fortify, I would actually fortify in the southern parts, where the iron density also is quite low. And I want to show you this one place, and that's Kerala. Kerala has quite a low intake of iron. It's only about 10. But the amount of anemia is also one of the lowest in the country. And there's a good reason for that, because the diets are varied, and you may think that iron is the only cause, but there may be other causes like B12. And if you look at the vegetable and fruit intake in India, I mean, it should be all green, let's face it. I mean, it's not. It's not at all green. It's about 125 to 150 grams of vegetables on average in this country. It goes up in places. But fruits, it's ridiculously low. And a lot of it is really starchy fruits like bananas. And the one place that really does well is again Kerala for fruits. So the other point I will make to you is that there are complexities of intestinal health and function. And that is that there are a lot of non-food issues like hygiene and parasites, anti-proteases in what you eat, and phytate, which will reduce the absorption of foods. And I just want to show you very quickly a study that we did. Requirement in children was about 43 milligrams per kilogram per day, right up here. And after deworming children, it drops to about 36. This is a big drop. And because lysine sites in the gut essentially are irritating things, as you can imagine, and they stop you from absorbing, and they also make the gut secrete a lot of mucus. Mucus is a very rich source of amino acids, and that gets lost. So this is why when you deworm people, they do better. And if you look at the non-food issues like sanitation, education, it's all very poor in this country. This is the point I'm making, that there is something called environmental enteric dysfunction. Someone showed a nice picture of the soil and the intestine. Well, think about the soil where the grass was cut completely and there's no grass sticking out. That's what environmental entropy is. There are no villi, so there's not much absorptive surface, and the gut is a bit leaky, and there's not enough digestive enzymes. So essentially, such a gut, when presented with food, is unable to process it. And this is where I think in India it's very important to actually work on these things. And this is something that, out of my interest, we've been growing chickpea and mung bean at the University of Agricultural Sciences in Bangalore, and we water that with deuterium, which is heavy water, and it gets labeled up. And then you'll get a certain labeling of the amino acids in the chickpea and the mung bean. And when you feed it to people, and here's the point I'm making again, you can measure the absorption of amino acids from that bean. And we measured it, and you'll find, and it's quite depressing to see that lysine, just about half to 60% is absorbed. What that tells you is that, you know, and it's shocking to think that you may have to feed double the amount of dal to get the effects you want. And that's why maybe you fail. When you just give the required amounts of dal, you're not giving enough. Now, I'm not saying these figures are set in stone. There is a great variability in human beings, but I've found when I've measured variability, it's about 15%. It's still, so on the upper end of that variability, you're never going to get to 100% digestibility. In fact, what we're doing now is growing rice and growing wheat and ragi with heavy water, and we're going to measure the digestibility of those proteins. I'm not sure I'll come with any great exciting news. It'll still be a bit depressing. So the key is, and I think this digestibility of protein is also linked to this elephant in the room, and that's honestly phytate. Phytate stops iron absorption. Phytate, and I'm doing some experiments, I think it also reduces protein digestion. It'll stop thiamine absorption. It'll do everything that's not so good for you. And I think this is what we have to address. You have to find ways by which grain is grown with a lower ratio of phytate to the micronutrient, or you have to find a grain that expresses a higher level of phytase, which is the enzyme that can reduce phytate. And indeed, with ragi, that is a strategy that you can do when you malt the ragi and you germinate it for a day or two. So, translation. You wanted that? I mean, you didn't want that. I said you want that, so I'll give it to you. And that is, what is a quality food-based diet? We're talking nutrient security, but I'm saying through foods. Now, the problem is that cereals drive nutrient consumption in this country. The proportion of food, of iron from cereals, for example, is huge. If you look at this part, again, the northern parts of the country, it's all cereal-based iron. And if you look at it, I mean, you know, the percentage where you really want to have your percentage to be at a lower level, and you'll see that Kerala and all the other states have less from cereals. Proportion of protein from cereals, again, huge. This is the level that the UK diet has. It's less than 25% comes from cereals. This is what the NIN diet tells you to have. The rest of the country is orange. It should be green. So a lot of cereals are eaten. And the way to look at food security, I think, if you're going to mix food and quality and nutrients, is to do these kind of radar charts, where that black circle there represents nutrient requirements as defined by NIN. If any diet meets those, that it'll form a circle which is either the same size as this black circle or bigger. If it's smaller, it's insecure. So let's look at things. NIN actually has something called the balanced vegetarian diet, and this is it. 250 grams of vegetables. So think about that. 250 grams of vegetables and 50 grams of fruits per day. We always think in days, although I think we should think in weeks, but take it as it is. Now you look at this, the diet is pretty good except for preformed vitamin A. There's just not enough color in this diet. That's your problem. I haven't put B12 on this because it's an extremely depressing story. This graph should be blue. It's white, except for Kerala, which is resolutely non-vegetarian, and you get a bit more B12 in that diet, and in the northeast. But the rest of this country is just white. So if you look at NNMB diet, the diets that were found by the NNMB in their rural communities, this is the diet. If you look at it, the outline tells you how well it fits in terms of nutrient security. The red circles tell you where there's quite significant insecurity. If you were to give such a person some rice, 100 grams rice extra, you'll find the energy bumps up a bit, but not enough, and everything is pretty much the same. Give another 50 grams of dal, now you've got energy and protein pretty much good, bad on fat, bad on vitamin A, bad on thiamine. Give them some green leafy vegetables, and you begin to see most things are getting okay. The only difference is fat. You give them 20 grams of oil, and now you see that the diet begins to meet. So I'm not saying this is the way to do it. I'm not saying follow my numbers, but I think there's a method to this, method to trying to figure out how should people eat. Because as we say, let there be color on a plate, let there be this and that, you have to translate it. And I am most concerned about translating what I'm saying into a seasonal paradigm. I don't know how to do it. I think some of you have to help in that way. And I just want to finish with this. If you think that people produce what they consume, I know you know they don't. Well, this is a map. These are just maps of production of food in India. This is from animal husbandry, production of milk in India. And it tells you there's a lot of greenness here where there's a lot produced, much less consumed. Look at pulses though. There's a whole, the Central Highlands, there's a huge dal basket over there, but hardly any consumed. So obviously we are having the situation of food being produced, but not being eaten appropriately. I'll end there. Thank you.
I'll be presenting some very old studies that we had done because I wanted to link horticulture and agriculture with nutrition. Some of the work that we did years back, but when West Bengal had just from one of the lowest producing states of the country had suddenly shot up to the highest producing states. So I'll just come on that, and I'm going to refer to one of the papers of Madhura, based on which actually at that time she was placed in West Bengal. The whole study has initiated. These are just general issues. As we know, we are doing food diversification is very important. Two case studies that I would like to share with you is, one is impact of cropping patterns on nutritional status. It was done by the Planning Commission, supported by Planning Commission. And the second one, impact of horticultural intervention and vitamin A in status, that was supported by FAO from Rome. So these are the two studies, one on cropping pattern and one on horticulture, both done in the same district of West Bengal. Now we have chosen Purulia. This is a study which actually from Madhura's I'm referring. 1980s, West Bengal was one of the lowest producing states out of the 17 districts that we had. Now we have 25. It's been cut into smaller ones, but it suddenly shot up to be one of the highest producing states in 10 years' time. And what happened was Purulia, which was the lowest producing state, shot up to be fourth. So what was it? Purulia was, all the districts improved, but Purulia improved in leaps and bounds. It is an arid district. It was very difficult, highest tribal population. But this was something that was analyzed at that time with Madhura, and they found that this shot up to be. So the reason we did both the studies in Purulia was this was one of the main reasons, to find out what impact has it had. Did agriculture have an impact in the whole process? The first one that I'll do is supported by the Planning Commission, Government of India. The study was done to look into the entire socioeconomic health and nutritional status in two blocks of the district. In each block, we took 2 villages. Of course, the population was from most backward classes, mostly tribals, drought-prone areas. We took 2 blocks, Balarampur and Badabazar, 1 monocropping and 1 multi-cropping village from each block, so that we could compare between the villages and among the 2 district villages to see what was happening. We did a whole lot of assessments, nutritional assessment, clinical assessment of deficiencies, water environmental sanitation. Laboratory test was only 2, looking at the hemoglobin and iodine level in salt. We did the diet survey, 1-day diet survey, calculated as per ACU. The knowledge attitude practice of mothers, where they're accessing MCH services. Being at the All India Institute of Hygiene and Public Health, we had very strong links with the public health sector. Immunization coverage with vitamin A profile access program, because we linked not only to the cropping pattern, but also to the vitamin A profile access programs. Looked at the morbidity pattern of diarrheal diseases, mostly from women, and we looked what were the results. The results, I'll come very quickly into it. About 40 to 90% were tribal populations from one village to another. Land holdings were mostly marginal farmers. Education, about 80 to 9% females were illiterate. Male literacy was 36 to 60%, so literacy was very low. Housing was nearly all kacha houses, so very, very poor. One of the most impoverished blocks of the district. Water was enough because they used from pakka wells. That was one of the things the then government had done, was to get them enough water. I think that was one of the reasons why agriculture improved. The micro-environmental conditions, the sanitation was extremely low, only nearly 100% had open defecation. Only very small percentages could use latrines, mostly by women at night. That's all, but even women, most of the men went for open defecation. Garbage disposal was about 25 to 30%, use it for manure. Rest was thrown all around. Age at menarche was quite early. Antenatal care, they used 80 to 100% used the primary health care services. That was one of the very positive issues that have happened during the previous government. And high percentage of women did take folifer tablets, but none of them, most of them didn't complete the full dose. They initiated, but they didn't take, compliance wasn't that good. And colostrum and breastfeeding was pretty good. Most of the mothers being in the village areas did, but that too we had expected much more. It was only about 75%. The diarrheal disease, we found that high percentage of mothers stopped giving any food during diarrhea. That was a very negative behavior of a mother to the child. This won't be the age at marriage, not age of mothers. Most of the mothers still believe that the girl should be married off early. It was mostly, as you know, actually I work more on wash now than on nutrition. We find that one of the main reasons why women want to get their daughters married quickly is insecurity if they go for open defecation. Because they have to go for open defecation either early in the morning, and if they got late at night outside the house. Most of the criminal cases that occur in villages are due to open defecation, because the girls and the women have to go out, and that's when a lot of women are stalked. So that is one of the reasons we found sanitation has got many impacts, but one is a very important, security of women. So this was very popular. Personal hygiene, about 40 to 60% mothers were indifferent. They took green leafy vegetables, but they avoided, many of the mothers avoided giving it to the children. In Bengal, the custom is you throw away the water of the cooked rice. We cook the rice and we throw away the water. Here we found that it varied. Being a tribal community, less. The water was thrown at a lesser detail. The dietary intake, we found that very poor quality. The dietary intake was very, very poor. Even cereal was not enough for many of the families. Though in Bengal the cereal is produced in enough quantities, many of them didn't take. All the micronutrient deficiencies were extremely high. But what we found that between the monocropping and the multi-cropping villages, there was no significant difference in the dietary intake. Though both in the multi-cropping also the cereal deficiency we found. So this was one of the main things. Nutritional status matched with the nutrient intake. Many of the child and infants were undernourished. One good thing, maybe tribal population, male children were more undernourished than the female children. The girl child was better than the boy child. That was one of the very positive things, but it was because of a tribal population. As we all know, all over most of the states, we did a HDR with Madura and Tripura, and we very clearly found that girl children are better off than boy children in the tribal communities. After 12, even in the tribal community, after the age of 12, there's a reversal. But till 12, usually in the tribal community, girls are by far better off than the boys. So I think this is something we should learn from the tribal communities. Same thing happened for the MUSC also. We did a nutritional by weight for age. Again, a very high percentage of wasting, high percentage of undernutrition. And we found that children of Bamnidhi village was more, as we found them in the previous one also, were comparatively more malnourished. Nutritional status, we found with the clinical findings, we used most of our doctors to do it, had most of the micronutrient deficiencies. It was looked, and beetroot spot and night blindness was quite common. Again, Bamnidhi village, which is a monocropping village, was the worst. Morbidity profile, they had cough, cold, diarrhea, etc., but no tuberculosis, goiter, or cretinism. We didn't have any iodine deficiency or tuberculosis. The conclusion is possibly for this study that though there was an increase, there was a multi-cropping thing had come in, but all these factors low nutrition, low income, poor community, no compliance, lack of enough water, very poor sanitation, poor drainage, poor personal hygiene could have been the responsibility for undernutrition. But what we found as blocks, Balarampur was better than Baravazar. It was not on monocropping or multicropping. Both monocropping and multicropping was better in Balarampur compared to Baravazar. So there's no statistically significant difference between the both. Socioeconomically, environmentally, both were more or less similar. One reason we thought was possibly multicropping had just been introduced a year back, 2 years back. It takes time possibly, but multicropping at that time showed no impact in the initial phases. I go to the next one, impact of horticultural intervention, and this is on vitamin E status, funded by the FAO of United Nations in Rome. This study was very widely published, and just before that I had done a work on street foods, for which we had got the SAMA award. And the FAO had told me at that time that if that hadn't got the SAMA award, this was going to get it, because this was something which was taken up by the government, and even today it's a huge success in that area. Huge success. The socioeconomic parameters of the people living there has gone up by leaps and bounds. I'll just show that very quickly. The objective was to do production of green leafy vegetables, give a lot of health education, and main thing was link it to the vitamin prophylaxis program. It was not a standalone program of just giving green leafy vegetables and vegetables, but link it to the health services. It was a joint intervention, because just giving green leafy vegetables or vegetables standalone we felt wouldn't do, and government was totally with us. The whole project was done with the government, through the government, with a total help of Panchayat. My co-investigator, Mr. Monindra Gip, is now the CADC chairman. So he has been looking into the project. He has actually incidentally worked a lot with B.K. Ramachandran and Madhura also. Excellent person, but very pro-agriculture, very pro-horticulture person. The place of the study again was Purulia. We had taken 3 blocks, about 1,500 households, specifically those which had vitamin deficiency, 30 villages, and we had 1 nursery we formed. But nursery and the households went hand in hand. We used a lot of existing nurseries as well. We developed a lot of IC material, and somebody was mentioning plays this morning. Jatra is a very common thing in Bengal, and being tribal communities, there's a dance called Chhau dance. They wear masks and dance in that area of Purulia. Many of these families were from the Chhau family. So we use a lot of public awareness generation through them, using the local material, local languages, because many of these people are working there from that area. So we didn't bring people from outside to do the work, mostly used the people of that area where they belong to. That was because of Mr. Gope. So we had a whole lot of, somebody mentioned crop calendars, we gave them crop calendars, helped them to grow vegetables and green leafy vegetables depending on which crop grows. Sometimes we used very low water requirement horticultural products like Shozne Data, I don't know what you call them, which is on trees, very high in vitamin A, a little slimy. Is it taken, huh? Shozne Data, yeah. So we use different kinds of things for different seasons. A 3-year project. What we found was that the cultivation went up tremendously in all the 3 blocks. I mean, it means about 10%, average on a 10%, which we thought was quite good. We found that the production of all vegetables in general increased. Increasing number of households felt that they should eat it. That was more important. Earlier, most of it was thrown away. They wouldn't eat it. It was not tasty enough. The weekly consumption went quite a bit up. At least 3 times a week they would take these vegetables. And the consumption increased also 20 to 30%. So that was a huge increase we felt. And along with that, of course, the vitamin E prophylaxis program, which had very low coverage, started picking up and eventually had a wonderful coverage. The prevalence of that was a high beetroot spot night blindness, especially night blindness zone, also reduced to a significant level, very significant level, both beetroot spot and night blindness, pregnant women. The knowledge of increase on that night blindness will decrease, because that was a problem for them, because electricity wasn't there everywhere. Night blindness used to be a huge problem for the people. So what happened was, when they knew that night blindness was going to decrease if they take this, that was kind of a very positive feeling among the community. So that also went down to a great extent. More the night blindness, greater was the impact. The knowledge increased greatly. I'm just not going into it, around 10%. And the most common reason the respondents gave was intrinsic vegetables were good for nutritional value. This basic knowledge that will be good for nutrition for all of them was a very simple, straightforward message given to them. Very simple, not by telling them have a multicolored plate or this is your RDA or this is what, no, nothing like that. Very simple, straight, they wouldn't even understand it. Very simple, straightforward messages, and therefore the awareness that both DGLB and yellow fruits have a good source of vitamin A also increased tremendously. We used multiple sources, and it was with their own people, in their own language, that we used it. And we subsequently, I'll just finish my person right now, we have started with a small nursery. Now they have an orchard with 110 acres of land, which is linked to the Comprehensive Area Development Program, CADC. At that time, we had started a food processing unit in a very small way, because in the seasonal time, we have lots of vegetables, vitamin A, which were being wasted. So we taught them how to process them. Built on that, through the CADC, they have a huge food processing factory now in that area, and they're marketing their products. A lot of them are sold in Calcutta. So that area has now become a very high yielding, it's not just vitamin A now, high yielding area of orchards where various fruits are produced. Even what they do at times, a lot of pineapples, actually, they send lots of vegetables and all that to the Northeast. And Northeast has a lot of pineapple. So when the empty trucks are coming back, they give the drivers a little money to bring back pineapples. It doesn't grow there, but they bring back the pineapple and put them through their food processing factory. So they produce pineapple jam and pineapple spread and stuff like that and sell it in the Calcutta market. So it has now become a marketing technique, but this all happened because we had the help of the government at that time. So these are two projects that I could mention on how agriculture or horticulture impacted on nutrition. I'm more a wash person now, so not that much in nutrition. So anyway, I thought this, but even then I think you mentioned, Dr. Kulpa, that water sanitation has to be linked to it. I can't complete without saying that. Whatever agricultural inputs or whatever you give, for example, we've just done a recent analysis for Tamil Nadu government, taking all the 32 districts for the Tamil Nadu Planning Commission, and we have definitely found the sanitation and stunting is matching beautifully. Kanyakumari with high sanitation has lowest stunting, Aryalur with highest opidification has highest stunting. So I think agriculture is very important, but a multi-pronged approach of putting clean environment, personal hygiene, and enough food at an affordable cost in the way people understand. I think a multi-pronged approach is what we need, in very simple words, to overcome the huge problem of undernutrition that we face today. Thank you very much.
So, thank you for the introduction. The importance of agriculture is food security for all, sustainable livelihoods and income, and export earning. But of these three, the agriculture as well as administrators, economists pay greater attention to sustainable livelihood, income, and export. You ask them what is agriculture for? Income and export. It's only recently that I find that nutrition is beginning to be getting into the mindset of the administrators and people. And when they talk of nutrition also, it's calories and proteins. Micronutrients, unfortunately, are often forgotten. Now, nutrition security goes beyond food security. Food security implies access at affordable cost to all food groups at all times and for all individuals to be able to give a balanced diet, which means proteins, calories, vitamins, etc., etc. For nutrition security, as was said by a number of speakers and even Indira, you have to have not just food security, but also healthy environment, potable water, healthcare outreach, and physical activity, which is coming down. Now, with the problem is the National Nutrition Monitoring Bureau, which unfortunately has been closed down, their surveys show that if Indian diets, which are primarily cereal-based and have inadequate intake of legumes and vegetables, etc., with the result they are qualitatively deficient in micronutrients. contrary to the hype about protein deficiency, at least NNMB surveys show that if calorie requirement is met, if food gap is met, then most of the families get adequate protein, though qualitatively maybe there is room for improvement. But even if you get enough calories, enough food, micronutrient deficiency is there. And this is the reason was said earlier that orphan foods like millets and pulses have failed to get attention. Even in the Food Security Act, emphasis is on distribution of cereals, and thanks to Dr. Saminathan, millets. Unfortunately, the public distribution system hasn't included nutritious foods like pulses, etc. And I was shocked to read the other day that in Andhra Pradesh, the Chief Minister says that he will now eliminate pulses, oil, etc. from public distribution system and increase the quantum of rice. I dread to think of what will happen if that happens. I hope some nutritionists speak out. Now, remedies for dietary micronutrient deficiencies are the medicinal approach. We have the iron folate tablet, the vitamin A supplementation. Then there is the food fortification. Iodized salt is one of the success stories, and now there is talk about fortifying milk with vitamin A and D, etc., etc. But perhaps the most sustained and empowering approach is what Dr. Gopalan would say, farm-based approach rather than pharmacy-based approach. And in this farm-based approach is also the quantum of biofortification, which is done through conventional breeding, marker-assisted breeding, and genetic engineering. For many, unfortunately, activists, genetic engineering is a dirty word. It has tremendous scope. Just now, Anurag talked about reducing phytate content, increasing phytase activity. How do you get all these things done without scope of genetic engineering? Of course, proper checks and balances have to be there. Now let me move to some of our work. I feel humble that contrary to the large-scale studies that were presented by Indira and earlier workers, we are trying to develop models for nutrition security, and we have tried to develop models for food security, environment security, healthcare outreach, and all of this has been published. But all our effort is through government funding like DSC, DBT, so it's on a very small scale. Now, some of our our work has been mostly in Medak district, and though in our earlier studies where we started introducing nutrition gardens, we said come one, come all, who is interested can join. But in our more recent studies, because of financial constraints, we are concentrating on families with pregnant women and women with 6 months to 24 months old children. The reason being, as Dr. Saminathan said or someone said, first 1,000 days are most important. So this selection is forced on us because of financial constraint and nutritional wisdom. Now, one thing that the farmers are very reluctant to do is shift from their traditional cropping pattern. These are small farm holdings, half acre, 1 acre, at the most 2 to 5 acres is a very, very big thing. We don't have landlords. So, and most of the general cropping pattern there is water guzzling. Though it's a water stressed area, water is through bore wells, there is no lift irrigation. It's mostly through paddy and sugarcane, and some amount of maize, and maize is in the crop with red gram quite frequently. So we try to tell them that look, just put aside 10 guntas, 20 guntas, 40 guntas make an acre for raising nutrition gardens. And here we give them seeds of green leafy vegetables. They are a treasure trove of nutrients. And there is a variety, they grow throughout the year, etc. So variety of green leafy vegetables, then beans, then of course tomato, etc. If they want to grow kaddu and brinjal and turai, we don't say don't. but we don't give them seeds. We want to concentrate on micronutrient-dense vegetables. We have also introduced iron-rich bajra and beta-carotene-rich sweet potato, thanks to Archana Mukherjee. Generously she keeps sending saplings, and our fellows somehow don't handle them well. We are also promoting environmentally sustainable interventions. We are not going totally organic, but we have introduced vermicompost. We have introduced botanical pesticides like neem-based pesticides, chili garlic, and in one village we have now set up, a self-help group has set up a neem-based powder production, and they are selling it not just as a manure, but also as a pesticide with labels describing what should be done in Telugu. We are also raising backyard nurseries. What we do is we give seeds and saplings of plants like papaya, drumstick, curry leaves, and Bacilla alba to women to raise saplings. Each woman may raise 100 saplings, 150 saplings. We buy them at 5 rupees, and then initially we used to give free, but one thing is you must remember, don't start giving everything free. So we charge them first. We give seeds free, saplings they pay. And one thing a farmer will not, if a farmer sees a good sapling, she or he will not resist buying it. Then we have also set up in a few places backyard poultry with rainbow rooster and Gramapriya varieties of high egg yielding breeds. And here again our strategy is not to give 10, 20, 50 birds. We give 4 birds. They buy the birds, but we give 1 cock free because the farmer's psychology is something they must get. So we try to satisfy that. But the most important part, which is very much missed in all government programs, is social engineering, behavioral change communication. Technology intervention without behavioral change communication will have no impact. And this is something which we do by, I'll show you what we do. Now, our approach is to first, we don't have a bottom-up approach. We go to the community and tell them what we want to do. Then they ask, will you give us everything free? No. Then, will you buy vegetables from us? Will you give us money? No. So, their idea is economic compulsion outweighs nutritional wisdom. So, they want money for everything or try to get free everything. Then we have centralized training programs where for earlier, only the men used to come. Now we started sending letters in the name of the woman, and she comes with her small child, and we allow the children to come. Some of our external experts get very upset with all these children, but then we do cooking demonstration, feeding, apart from education. And mind you, our education is just not nutrition. It's a package of sanitation, health, nutrition, everything. Then we have focus group discussion, school education, very important. Then we go in the evening with our slide and video shows and set up video programs. And then pamphlets in Telugu. We do impact assessment through knowledge, attitude, practice surveys of mothers with preschool children, with 6 to 24 months old children, initially and at the end of 3 years when the project ends. Now this project is going to be for 4 years. Then we also survey household food consumption, for which we have developed a method which has been published, acceptance of farm technologies, and we also do growth monitoring. Many of these women are registered with ICDS. In our area, ICDS works very well. So we do growth monitoring of 6 to 24 months old children through growth monitoring. Now this is a mixed cultivation vegetable garden, maize and fodder grass, maize, vegetables and fodder grass. Then where they have orchards, we ask them to grow green leafy vegetables, shade-loving vegetables in the orchard. Here is a mixed garden with red gram, vegetable and paddy. Now this is a backyard nursery which is raised by them. This vermicompost is also for home use. There is not much market for, because this is not an area where there are big farms where they can sell vermicompost. Now, the major observations are, as Indira said, even with illiterate women, if messages are reinforced, there is remarkable improvement in knowledge. And this, I feel, is the main reason why whatever good results we are seeing is due to. There is good acceptance of farming technology. With food consumption, we wanted their vegetable consumption to go up. But we were disappointed that vegetable consumption did not go up. Why? We asked them what they do. Despite reinforcing messages, 25 to 50% of vegetables are sold. But green leafy vegetable consumption, both frequency and total consumption went up. You see, over this period, the price of vegetables has gone up enormously. And in one of the projects, we had control villages. So we were shocked to find that in these control villages, vegetable consumption came down. So homegrown vegetables replaced what they would have bought from outside. Now, as I said, we monitored, growth monitoring we did. This is over a 3-year period. And this chart shows two things. One is the decline in moderate and severe malnutrition weighed by age. Monsoon, malnutrition goes up. This is a known fact. Brahma will bear me out. And this is because of morbidity. Another thing, in early monsoon, there is acute shortage of vegetables. And this is the time when nutritional deficiencies are maximum. We have been able to bring down malnutrition, but there is something, we are not able to bring it down below 22, 23%. This is an ongoing project, and again, it's the same thing. I told you, with backyard poultry, our experience has been good. There is increase in consumption, frequency, as well as consumption of eggs. With just 4 birds, whatever eggs are produced, they consume at home. If we had given them, when I mentioned this to one of my poultry experts, he said, with 4 birds, you must give them 25 birds so that they can sell. I said, our whole idea is to make them consume what they produce at home. So we said 2 types of farming. Farming for income, whatever you are doing, but this is for home consumption. So the final message is, combine technology with software, social engineering. Without doing that, you will not be able to see results. But we have to now see why we are not able to, whatever improvement in nutrition that we have seen, I feel a great deal is due to educational intervention and behavioral change of the mothers. As Indira said, they throw away rice water, ganji, and all the nutrients go with that. There are some practices which are hard to change. Start breastfeeding from 1 hour, that has caught up very well in our area. But don't throw away excess water, still 25–30% do that. Avoiding papaya during pregnancy, there is improvement but not complete. They avoid banana during pregnancy. Do you know why? Because banana tree fruits only once, there will be single child infertility. There are so many of these, what we call in Telugu, murna makalu. And you have to fight those. But then there is the grandmother influence. We try to somehow bring grandmothers to. Another important thing that is happening now is, now the agriculture scientists are interacting with us through Atma program and others. So we are hoping that by the time we finish next year, they will take over. Thank you.
Well, good evening. Respected Professor Swaminathan, I know he is left. Colleagues, some former colleagues, eminent scientists, and the agriculture nutrition fraternity, and my session chair, and dear friends. As a hardcore nutritionist, I agree and echo the thoughts of all what our other speakers have said, and it's been a very enriching yesterday and this morning. So I think a lot has been said. At the end of the day, I think it simplifies my task, and I will take you on a very practical illustration of related to two examples from FAO's technical support especially in Asia, Bangladesh and Laos, on food-based strategies that have been used integrating agriculture or leveraging agriculture for nutrition, but integrated with health-based strategies as well. I think we all agree that making farming systems, in order to make them work for nutrition, there are challenges, and this has been central to the planning and the programming process that has been followed. The first is narrowing the nutrition gap, and this has already been reiterated quite clearly in the morning, the gap between what foods are available and what is really needed for a healthy diet. Now, this is not that simple, but this is where the agriculturist and the nutritionist have to plan together, and we do have policy tools which are used, but unfortunately very often these are not really used in planning. We talk about food production targets, we also need to think about nutrient targets, so that we actually know from the home garden, if you produce X number of vegetables and so many fruits, do these really translate into nutrient requirements for the day, at least at the larger level. Planning programs with explicit nutrition goals and objectives, but these have to translate into nutrition outcomes so that they can enhance the delivery on nutrition outcomes. We have important policy tools which FAO has been supporting member countries. We have Dr. Longwa right here. We have many of our senior colleagues who worked on food composition tables, the food-based dietary guidelines, and more recently the complementary feeding guidelines and the improved recipes, as we call them, using the trials of improved practices. The nutrient-dense recipes using animal source foods. Dr. Anura mentioned about the nutrient density aspect. Now, all this is all fine for us to talk about when we talk about weaning and healthy complementary foods. But you need to really put this into a concrete recipe that the mother can be advised, the mother can be taught, and this can be fed to the child at the age of 6 months up to 2 years of life, along with continued breastfeeding. Now, these are very critical in order to inform policies, notably food, agriculture, and health policies. Monitoring and evaluation mechanisms are central to any agricultural program, and this is where we find, although it's fundamental, there are often challenges. Capacities for nutrition, leadership, and technical training in nutrition in agriculture. Now, this again, it's not just a nutritionist, but a nutritionist with cross-sectoral expertise. These are really few and difficult to find. So that kind of an orientation, that kind of training is quite essential when you talk about leveraging agriculture for nutrition. It's not just a health-based approach. At the ICN2 in 2014, when organized by FAO and WHO and other UN agencies, and when an impressive representation of over 200 countries and member states and heads of governments had come, some recommendations were proposed and shared, and these were agreed upon, which were known as the key recommendations for improving nutrition through agriculture and food systems. And the MSSRF and our experts here are very familiar with this, so this is not something that you do not know. However, I will quickly reiterate some of them. And the purpose is, these programs and investments, as we call them eventually, they should be, governments need to invest in this so that in terms of our overall annual development programs, there is adequate investment for nutrition, and we currently see that this is abysmally low. Anyway, incorporating explicit nutrition objectives and indicators into the design and tracking and mitigating potential harms. This is one of the important recommendations. Assessing the context at local level, we have problem trees. There are ways in which this can be done, and you have to design appropriate activities. I think Indira presented an eloquent one, Dr. Bamji, and the others, where you've talked about the entire integrated approach. This has to address not only the underlying causes and the other causes of malnutrition. We all know the famous UNICEF causal framework. Targeting the vulnerable and improving equity. Focusing on the first 1,000 days of life, of which we are only too familiar, and also enhancing access to resources and decent employment. Central to this work is also collaborating with other multiple sectors, notably the continuum sectors of agriculture, that is crop, horticulture, fisheries, livestock, health, women and children's affairs, as well as WASH, which are very important sectors when we want to provide an integrated approach in order to enhance the delivery on nutrition outcomes. Maintain or improve the natural resource base. I will not go into these details, but this is an area that has to also be considered when we look at recommendations for improving agricultural programs for nutrition. Empowering women, central to this. We've discussed this. We have Nitya and others over here who've been working on this area. Facilitating the production, diversification, and also the production of nutrient-dense foods. Today there's been a lot of focus on animal source foods. Given the protein, the good quality protein, the micronutrient-dense foods with reference to bioavailability issues. And this is very critical, especially when we look at anemia, where small amounts of animal protein can do wonders in terms of improving not only the bioavailability, but also contributing to heme iron, which is essential for good absorption. Improving the processing, storage and preservation. This has been talked about in order to enhance the shelf life, nutritive value, and also for income for the mother. And there are issues related to food hygiene, food safety, the seasonality issues, post-harvest losses. All these are essential, but these must be healthy, simple and easy to prepare at the household level, because there are different levels at which processing is being done at the household level, also at the semi-commercial, and of course for market access and for income, for value addition as we might want to call it. Expand market access of vulnerable groups. This is a very important area. I think Dr. Bamji mentioned a bit about it, and also the others, about enhancing the, I don't want to use the word value chain in this context, but really in terms of market access to sell the foods apart from your nutrition, but for value addition and income. And at the end of it all, you must have a strong nutrition education program that's integrated or that supports the agricultural program, because just production alone, we agree with that, although there are foods available, in order to make sure this is translated into action, we must have a strong nutrition education, or a BCC program as you might want to call it. I'll now quickly take you through these two countries where there are some lessons learned. I'll only present selected results, and if there are some details, I can talk about it later with you. The programs that have been supported across countries in Asia, a package of integrated interventions focusing on agriculture, the larger agriculture, that's horticulture, livestock and aquaculture for production and consumption diversification in order to enhance healthy and sustainable diets. Now, safety issues are also considered under this. Nutrition education and cooking demonstrations of which we are too familiar, focusing on household and women's dietary diversity, the minimum acceptable diet for children, and complementary feeding, and certain appropriate processing technologies, and integrating wash and hygiene initiatives in order to create an enabling environment between agriculture and nutrition. And all this has been derived, drawn, or rather linked into the national food and nutrition policies. And in the case of Bangladesh, I would like to particularly point out the country investment plan for agriculture, food security and nutrition, which was established in 2010. And some of you who were here in 2011 in New Delhi, where if the IFPRI conference was held, some of this was presented, the agriculture minister had come, and countries started looking at the investment issues with reference to what would be the return for nutrition from the investments. So this was an important area, and I'm pleased to let you know that FAO was actively involved in this, and Bangladesh was one of the countries that had spearheaded this process about investments in the country investment plan for agriculture, food security, nutrition. And the country investment plan 2 that is currently being prepared is focusing on nutrition sensitive food systems. So the main point I'm trying to make is there has been a very good interface between programs feeding into policy and policies orienting the programs, and vice versa. So this is really the concept. Highlights of the presentation. I'll just present you some evidence on the use and process of adopting a community-based approach. Now, when we say community-based approach, of which we are familiar, I think the important thrust, especially in a government context, if the government has to support this, you need to link the service delivery mechanism with, or the service delivery structures with the community-based mechanism, so that you are able to enhance the access, outreach, and the coverage of services, and you empower the local communities either through farmer field schools or through women farmer groups. And there are several NGOs, and I think I don't have to talk to India about this. This is very well done over here. But the point is to integrate this with the service delivery structures of the government or the sectors. Reviewing the role of food-based strategies within integrated home gardening systems, and how can this enhance the dietary intake, but with reference to nutrient density, dietary diversity, and the nutrition status of women and children, because it's not automatic that it simply translates into enhancing the delivery of nutrition outcomes. There are other underlying factors which have to be addressed, but the focus here will be on diet and nutritional status. This is an example of one of the horticulture programs in the case of Bangladesh, where FAO had supported, and there were horticulture technology models where over a 10-year period different fruit technologies were provided. But the example here I want to give you is taking mango and papaya as two fruits and drumstick as a leafy vegetable, how this was able to enhance the vitamin A supply at the household level and at a per capita individual level, where it was noted that a substantial part of the recommended dietary intake for micronutrients, in this case beta-carotene and vitamin A, and it was found that almost 97% of the RDI for vitamin A was met. And then there are other details about which I can talk if you can later on. Another simple local technology that was used, again this has been used in different countries, including in Tamil Nadu some years ago, I think in Dharmapuri district, but this was done in Bangladesh in some of the select 15 districts, where a local cool earthen pot, a double-walled system, then you have a pot inside and you put water outside in the larger pot, and the produce is kept inside, and you can see over a 5-day period that the produce inside remains firm and fresh with the local technology. And this has been scaled up to some extent, especially because these were all very poor, landless, marginal and small farmers, and this was found to be quite useful. Now these have been upscaled and it has improved as well, but the point is that some of this was helpful in also retaining the vitamin C, for which the analysis was done. Now we have the integrated agriculture health-based interventions districts, as we call them, where UNICEF supported the health part and FAO supported the agriculture-based nutrition part through the Ministry of Fisheries and Livestock and from the Health Ministry. This was an integrated package of the entire agriculture continuum through the farmer field schools, to the home gardens and through the community clinics. At the end of, we had a baseline in 2013 and we had an end line in 2016, and we found that with specific reference to the vulnerable groups, this were 50,000 households of women, and the criteria for selection was all households with children under the age of 5 years. They must have limited land, and we had criteria, willingness to participate, and every household that had children under 5 years and a pregnant and lactating women, they were taken as the target population and prioritized for the intervention. Anyway, at baseline they had a women's dietary score of only 3.7. Now the women's dietary diversity score, as you are aware of, earlier we used to have 9 food groups, and out of that you need to take a minimum of 5 out of 9. So it was just as low as 3.7, and at the end line we found for lactating women it improved to 4.9, and likewise in the pregnant women also it improved to 5.1. Now while dietary diversity is considered as a proxy for micronutrient adequacy, of course there are other methods which can be quantified, but this seems to be a simple and a reasonably accurate method which can be used in the field situation. And more recently FAO has updated this methodology to increase it to 10 food groups, where we separate the vitamin A rich vegetables as leafy and also the yellow orange. So this is quite important, and this is being validated further. With reference to anemia in children under the age of 2 years, we also noted that while the decline was not very substantial, but still from 16.7 it had dropped to 64% in the case of children in the 2 areas between baseline and end line. The point that over here, apart from the fact that children were not given iron and folic acid, it was more the pregnant women, but in the case of children, small fish balls using beef-based recipes, the complementary foods, these were promoted throughout along with leafy vegetables. And as Dr. Bamji, I saw it was mentioned, your food-to-food enrichment, the combinations about taking 2 different foods which can leverage each other and complement each other, such recipes were given, because very often mothers do not give these foods from the age of 6 months to 1 year. So there was a lack of knowledge and also lack of understanding about how to prepare them. And using the trials of improved practices, we've done this work in Cambodia, Afghanistan and in Bangladesh, and we found that this was found to be extremely powerful across the 64 districts in the country. In the case of child undernutrition in these IHABI districts, there was a remarkable reduction in underweight to some extent from 30.6 to 23.9, about 7 percentage points. Stunting was, I wouldn't say significant. Wasting showed some decline. Now, stunting decline will take at least a minimum of a 5-year period. Certainly, you can't really show much of a change at 3 years. But the point that we tried was to strengthen the linkages between agriculture production, mainly the animal-rich source foods, nutrient-dense foods, and stunting reduction linkages. So the program around that agriculture activity was linked so that they are able to appreciate how these foods are essential for the mother, not just using, of course, growth monitoring, linking it with complementary feeding is critical, but within an agricultural context, it was found to be quite powerful. So this was another useful and innovative activity that was integrated. With reference to egg consumption during pregnancy and lactation, I tend to agree with some of the points made that there are fads and fallacies during pregnancy. And it was interesting to note that 50% of the women did not take eggs during pregnancy and lactation. And there were fallacies along with this. Egg was considered hot, but they would take beef, they wouldn't take chicken, and other animal foods were taken. Milk consumption was extremely low. Anyway, this was around a poultry biosecurity program, and we found that at baseline and endline, there was a slight improvement in the egg consumption during both pregnancy and lactation. With reference to child underweight, again in the poultry biosecurity and nutrition project covered areas, moderately underweight children, there was a decline, and on total, it was found that from 31 it declined to 27%. What do these numbers really mean? The numbers really meant that over a 3-year period, there was an improvement in terms of nutrition impact looking at the growth of children. There are other parameters which we looked at, but I am not really highlighting those. In the case of LAO PDR, also subsistence farm households, extremely rural, poor communities in the districts. It was a pilot program where an integrated home gardening focusing on horticulture, livestock, fisheries, especially community ponds, pigs, these were being promoted. And the government took a very important proactive role in terms of development of the provincial and community level capacities to implement this home gardening. Field demonstrations were key outputs of this transfer of technology component as we describe it. And it was important to note that with reference to livestock, it served as a means of capital rather than promoting its consumption. So this is where we had some challenges, and the nutrition education had a powerful role. At the end of 18 months of implementation, we were able to find impacts on nutrition, apart from the fact that consumption of these foods was improved and there was enhanced awareness. Here you will notice that at baseline, the underweight, both moderate and severe, 23.2 to at 90 and 9.5 at baseline. At the first semester, it declined to 20.4 and 1.9. At the end of the intervention, at about 15 to 18 months, there was a good decline in both underweight, moderate as well as severe. Now, while these were initial results and this was a pilot program, the government of Laos took this up and we prepared a national action plan for nutrition, and the updates show that this has had an impact in terms of mainstreaming nutrition across their action plans and their policies, both from the forestry, agriculture and health ministries. In the case of Bangladesh, based on our experience throughout the world where FAO has been supporting food-based dietary guidelines, food composition tables and complementary feeding guidelines, these are being used, and I'm also pleased to let you know that these are being used by the agricultural planners and actually in designing their targets for nutrient production and for nutrient reaching and nutrient targets, and this was used in the development of the desirable dietary pattern for the country. There are some countries where the Philippines has done it, I know India has also done it, but some of these, in order to put them down into concrete practice on the ground, it really needs translating them into simple foods for the mother and for the families. The Global Dietary Diversity Indicator, which is now being promoted, and countries have started taking this to look at the assessment, where you have 10 food groups. I will not read out the food groups, but the difference from the earlier methodology is that you have leafy vegetables as one group, and you have yellow-orange vegetables as another group, along with the fruits. And a third category is fruits. And as I think Dr. Anura mentioned about what was the consumption of fruits, according to the recommendation, it is 400 grams per day of fruits and vegetables together. And I think most of us, it's somewhere around 50%. So where we say the rule of three vegetables and 2 fruits, if you look at it as totally 400 grams. So this is really what is the recommendation, and we don't have to I mean, all of us know about the importance of vegetables and fruits. Apart from your minerals and vitamins and micronutrients, they also are power-packed with phytochemicals and so many other therapeutic attributes which are very, very critical in your diet. The idea must be translated into action. As somebody said this just a little while ago, we need safe, healthy and nutritious foods on the plate. So here I have a little plate for you, and I'd like to spend a minute to talk a bit about this plate. The message in this plate was that your plate should have just half of the proportion of your plate should be with rice. Normally, if you look at the typical Bangladeshi diet or even the diet in Laos or Cambodia, it's filled with rice. So the simple technique is no more than half the plate with rice. The remaining half, each of the segments are divided into, you have lentils, you have a leafy vegetable, in this case it was red amaranth or lal shak as they call it, yellow orange vegetables with tomatoes and things, so that you have your sour fruits but your yellow orange is focused. Then you have a fish over here in this case, and you have a lemon and a chili. Fruit, interestingly we put fruit, we put a guava, but when we tested the concept, people said, no, we don't eat fruit as part of the meal. It's separate. I mean, we don't eat it. In fact, the point was, why should I eat fruits? Am I sick? This was how it used to be earlier. But gradually now you find that people do take oranges, they do take fruit. There's a tendency to buy apples, but local fruits are being promoted. So this was really the message that we did. And this is now being promoted throughout the country. And this is based on the science that was generated from the desirable dietary pattern, where it was an entire research work for about 2 years, and then the plate was developed, and for 18 months it was tested, and then this was produced. This is prepared on safe melamine. While people don't eat on this plate, at least it reminds you that this can be done. And it might be worth looking at this and adapting it to different contexts and countries, and I think this has been a very powerful tool, and we should be able to share the results with you in terms of its success. But this has been prepared in partnership with the community, and we have several partners who contributed. We have 3 critical messages, and for lactation they've added an egg. So I just thought this was a very useful concept when we talk about translating it into action. To summarize, the key lessons learned from this work were that you have to work simultaneously on policy, capacity strengthening as we call it, as part of training, have nutrition focal points across sectors. This is very, very critical if you want to strengthen nutrition leadership. We have government focal points who are not necessarily nutritionists but who have an interest in nutrition. And in the case of Bangladesh, we also have in the ministry's nutrition position where they are qualified nutritionists who are sitting there. So this, I think, makes a big difference again. At the central and local level, at subnational and community level, embed nutrition-sensitive agriculture work through multi-sectoral collaboration. This has been reiterated several times since yesterday, and adapting them to local livelihoods and opportunities. I think income generation is also critical, otherwise nutrition doesn't have any meaning. Impact comes from synergies. We are aware of that. So using these multiple entry points, and we believe that it is agriculture, health and the wash sectors which are important, backed with a strong women's approach. Monitoring and evaluation are fundamental. Today in all the programs that are being done, we have a very strong M&E component, and you must have those 4 indicators where we look at the national level on prevalence of population level undernourishment, food insecurity scale, dietary diversity and child stunting. These are actually put right in the policy so that these can help you to look at the impact over time in child in the case of chronic malnutrition. And this is in line with the World Health Assembly targets as well as the SDG 2. Creating an enabling environment for nutrition-oriented programming, not very simple. However, we have knowledge today. I don't have to talk to this audience. Adapting the current international recommendations, and you've been an important partner in this process, international policies and guidelines. Thank you for your patient hearing.
We have some time, so we will take some questions. Please introduce yourself and direct the questions to the person.
Without going into the language, I appreciated that Dr. Bamji, you brought up the point about social engineering, whatever you would like to call it, social learning or social engineering or social institutions, because I think without looking at the social context, we can't really make an impact in terms of interventions. But Dr. Anura, I was absolutely fascinated by your presentation, and you did yourself raise the point about the mismatch between the seasonality of agricultural production and the calculation of diets on a per day basis. And I think this is something that from some of our work which is coming up, that clearly there are seasonal stresses. I think Dr. Bamji also pointed to this, that monsoon or certain periods, planting season, if we look at the from the point of view of work and energy expenditures, then certain seasons are highly intensive in terms of work, and perhaps when there's less food available. I was just wondering, because I'm not a nutritionist, that these seasonal stresses, do they have any longer term impact in terms of our nutrition, or does it not matter? I mean, how important is it to actually understand the seasonal mismatch rather than the average figures? Thank you.
Hi, I'm Joanna from ICRISAT. The presentations were fantastic. I'm glad bioavailability was mentioned. What I don't often hear about in either research or in case studies on the ground, and I want to know if you have any examples of, we don't seem to hear talked about how the combination of different foods will affect the bioavailability. I mean, we know some information on it, but I don't see it brought into programs and exactly trying to combine exact combinations to get the maximum bioavailability. And the other one I don't often hear about is how the way the food is prepared to maximize the bioavailability. And are those brought into programs on the ground to help with nutrition?
The panelists, I must thank the panelists, because most of the discussion here highlighted the fact that there are non-food factors responsible for the malnutrition in this country. And while we're looking at that portion in terms of demand for the agricultural produce, we may have to look at the farming system of integrating, closing the loop in agriculture, where we are using the the wash sector outflows into the soil enrichment program. Probably that sort of approach would actually integrate it into a better system. Are we looking at that type of farming system for nutrition in future? Do we have something like that planned?
So this event is very much helpful for us, and we are talking about this nutrition sensitive and specific from the morning itself. But how agriculture is linking to this, impacting to the malnutrition, there are so many examples we are getting here. But in our discussion, we are not getting that type of information, that how it is directly impacting. So that's why we are talking about nutrition sensitive. This agriculture thing to nutrition is nutrition sensitive, not the specific, which is that health and WCD department is talking about. So more clarity is needed towards this thing.
So it's not enough to say that someone eats non-vegetarian once a week and therefore they meet their B12. They may not. I think that's why there's so much deficiency. And what we need to do is go about this nutrient by nutrient. I think the fat-soluble ones, some of the minerals, they do form stores in the body and you can store it. Some of the water-soluble ones, it's difficult to say. We have to figure out what happens. But it's got to be modeled with appropriate emphasis on nutrients of interest that you may have. So that's my short answer for that. To answer your bioavailability question, I think you're absolutely right. I mean, you have well-meaning policies for biofortification. For example, you have someone producing zinc-fortified wheat, and that's great. But eventually, I've actually measured this, and zinc in a molar ratio of 1:1 with iron cuts iron absorption by half. Now, this is a major problem for me. If there's going to be biofortified zinc, and then there's going to be somebody going in and putting up into as a chemical, it's all very confusing. And I think there are too many players doing what they want. And eventually somebody's got to come and say, let's make sure we are in the rational, because interactions, as you pointed out, are the most important thing. And about recipes, I can't agree with you more. I mean, there are great recipes that come out from Africa, sure, where native phytase in wheat flour has been used to reduce the phytate in porridges that have been made in Kenya. And it has increased the iron bioavailability to 10%. Just by adding a spoonful of simple atta flour a spoonful into a bowl of porridge and mixing it and keeping it at 50. Phytase is a very funny enzyme. It's an enzyme that likes to work at 50 degrees centigrade, and at about 55 or 60 it denatures. So you have to keep the food at a constant. So you have to figure out a way in a home that you can heat and keep it at 50 degrees. Keep it for 1 hour, and that porridge loses a lot of phytate. There are methods that can be used in the home. I think they have to be researched. You ask very good questions, both of you, but I'm sorry I don't have answers for you.
Yeah, just to follow up a bit on what Dr. Anura has said, I think on the stresses, seasonal stresses, from a programmatic perspective, there are 2 points that I'd like to make. Yes, we've seen higher levels of wasting when there has been short-term deprivation of, when there's been food shortages. And I would like to specifically give you the example of southern Bangladesh when there has been rainy season, where there is high waterlogging, increased salinity in these areas. The south is a vulnerable area, and we find that wasting levels, prevalence is always high during the monsoons. So I think in terms of agricultural technologies, and there has been some work done by Helen Keller and also the Ministry of Agriculture, where they've looked at certain resilient crops which are able to withstand the stress of these climate change impacts. So I think that is one thing. But during the rains and in seasonal periods when there is the lean season, yes, once, but that's a short-term situation. On the second point of bioavailability, and here again, these are based on permutations, combinations, also lab work looking at bioavailability. And if I'm not mistaken, I think the NIN current food composition tables has an explanation on this as well, on bioavailability. I'm not sure. Okay, it doesn't have. But there's some seminal work done on this. I think dietary enhancers, foods like beef, a little bit of meat in the dish, and if you're a vegetarian, soya protein. And I know that soya protein is not traditionally eaten in India, but we do have other, like maybe paneer, or we try to have some lentils, and we try to, especially the bean varieties, and if these can be combined with vitamin C rich sources, tamarind, lemon. There's been some work done on this, apart from Subhadra Sheshadri and so many others, and there's been periodic work from Thailand and other places. So these, and there are proportions that you can use. And oil also, when you make leafy vegetables or yellow-orange vegetables, some amount of oil is essential for absorbing the beta-carotene. So I think these are ways, little ways in which if we can get these powerful messages across to the community, at least it can help to use the right combinations, on not only combinations but also the right cooking methods to enhance nutritive value, and to some extent the bioavailability can be enhanced. But it sounds very simple. We have to actually make sure that this is demonstrated to scale, and we have science-based evidence to prove it. So I tend to and there's work done on this. I think this is what, there was about space for practice of dietary diversity. Yes, I think this is where we have to valorize our culinary diversity in the country and everywhere else. And there are plethora of recipes, and I do find even what we had here, I know this is not really India, the foods that we've had here this afternoon. In the sense, we know we have recipes, but it's not always, available for everyone, and they don't practice it. But I think this is one area where nutritionists and in the realm of agriculture, we have to promote through our nutrition education programs.
I think most of it's seasonal, and the diversity part is already taken care of. But just a small thing, at the All India Institute of Hygiene and Public Health, we had this Singur area, which is the first primary health center of the country, which was built 75 years back, when Dr. John Grant was our director, whose son, Jimmy Grant, was a UNICEF head later on. So what happened was that we go every year to do a survey in that area. Students go out, the diploma in public health students, doctors, and we've always found this seasonal deprivation usually shows in the next season. Like in winter, if they have enough fruits and vegetables, you find in winter actually they have a lot of deprivation. But when they gradually go after 3 months towards summer, then gradually they become much better nutritionally. That's in a general, I'm not going to nutrient-wise, but usually the deficiency shows up a couple of months later, so does the sufficiency. So it's kind of a cycle, so it's always happens all year round. So I think it's not the month that you have the deprivation, you don't show any deficiency. It comes a little later. Somebody asked about the enrichment of soil, was it using wash? I don't know, I'm sure. Did you ask about whether night soil can be used for soil enrichment? Did you mean that? Well, you see, China does it. China uses raw night soil right into their vegetable gardens. And they have huge productivity. But we are worried because along with that, we would have lot of fecal coliform coming into our, especially raw food, helminths. China boils everything. They never use anything raw. So it can be used, but it might have lot of health repercussions, especially with fecal coliform anyway being very high in most of our food, unless we because of a poor hygienic state. So I think it's very difficult unless you, proper hygienic care is taken. Using raw night soil is not recommended, but 1 month of oxidation and then you can use it. So 1 month of either treating with any methyl causing bacteria or keeping it just for oxidation, that's fine. You asked about how Purulia improved so much. Well, a very difficult question to answer because the state in 10 years from a very from lowest productivity came on to highest productivity. The reason for that are too many. Political will, agricultural input, I think modernization of some of the agricultural practices, whatever was it. Purulia was most benefited among all the districts that we have. The reason is very difficult. One, possibly was better water management. Purulia being very arid, so they had done special water management programs there. So the wells and other traditional water sources were restored in a very large manner. That was, I think, one of the main reasons. And I think along with that, the government at that time gave a lot of focus to Purulia, being the most deprived state, being the most tribal infested state, possibly some of these reasons, but very difficult to answer. But Purulia did leap forward. But West Bengal, as a result, 10 years, from 1980 to 1990, 10 years, from the last state came on the top. That was a very remarkable recovery for the state. It's still now, people still wonder what's happened. And I'm not an agricultural economist, so I'm not too good at saying that, but did improve, did improve. I don't think I answered very well anyway.
I'll take up the soil enrichment issue. I forgot to mention that apart from biofortification using genetic methods, people have shown very good results by enriching the fertilizers with specific iron or zinc or whatever. I have always used the term nutritionally sensitive and environmentally sustainable agriculture, which does involve soil enrichment by using vermicompost. And this is very, very important. And in our studies, apart from soil enrichment, we are also focusing on water management. Then somebody asked about income generation. Income generation is indeed very important because poverty is one of the factors leading to malnutrition. But we are not experts. We have a food processing center where we make almost 20 products, but marketing those, one of the reasons we set up that food processing center was income generation for women. But marketing has become a big issue. Social engineering is just a term, but behavioral change communication is another term that we use. Seasonal effects, I think you brought up a very important issue. Apart from morbidity in monsoon, it's also increased physical activity and lesser supply of food in early monsoon. All these three combine to increase the magnitude of bioavailability. It is mentioned. Of course, cooking methods like simple sprouting can increase bioavailability, malting. So we, in our education system, we are also emphasizing on cooking methods that would increase bioavailability. But the home scientists and nutritionists would know these better.
Well, I think you have heard the nutritionist point of view. And from the nutritionist point of view, the nutrient is very important. First thing. Second thing, nutrient interaction again is an important factor that you need to look at. The third thing is, how do you get your nutrients? You have to go into the dietary diversity to get your nutrients. From our food, we have so many foods, so many varieties, some of them are so rich in nutrients. For example, we recently analyzed the maize from the Indian Institute of Maize Research, one new PUSA developed variety that contains 1,100 micrograms of beta-carotene. So if a child, if in the intervention program this maize is given, then a child will get 70% of the vitamin A requirement with 100 grams of that maize. Also, if you look at the, we know that the mangoes are good sources of beta-carotene, but we also know that there are many varieties which have very high beta-carotene content. Example, when we analyzed the high as 16,000 micrograms of beta-carotene. Average beta-carotene, that's huge. Average beta-carotene content of mangoes is about 800 to 1,000. So when you have about 6 varieties that have above 10,000 and about a dozen, more than a dozen, actually that has more than 7,000 micrograms of beta-carotene. Using such thing which is conventionally used, I think that is what we need. Fortification right now is actually required because of the micronutrient deficiencies that are prevalent in the country. But in the long run, I think what we need is biofortified crops, or crops that have enriched micronutrients to meet the deficiency, because those micronutrients would be much more bioavailable than what we get from through the minerals or other things, sources. So not just about the nutrients or the nutrient-nutrient interaction, but also integrating all sectors to improve nutrition. With that few words, I would like to thank the panelists for the wonderful presentation and the audience for the patient hearing. Thank you all.